Welcome to episode 29, the Northern Kingdom, or the Fall of the Northern Kingdom. 2 Kings 17 through 25 and 2 Chronicles 29 through 32. And I'm Farrell.
And I'm Rhonda Pickering.
And we're just happy to be here. So
I'm super excited to be here, but at the same time, this has been a really difficult lesson to prepare for. Number one, it covers so much history that we're going to try and fly through. But number two...
I was going to say, sometimes it feels like we're on warp speed trying to get...
Yeah, I know, right? and number two, this, as you get into Jeremiah's life and even Elijah and everything and what they sacrificed, what they suffered in order to try and call the Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom to repentance because of the doom that was pending. It's very sobering.
Well, it's really sobering when you take into account that we're right there on that threshold too.
Exactly. So Ephraim amongst the nations is paralleled with that Northern Kingdom scenario in every way. And when we get into the prophets Hosea and Amos and Jonah, they're all of their preaching is falling right here in this time period of the fall of the Northern Kingdom. Now, this section in 2 Kings is the parallel to Isaiah 36 to 39. And when we get to Isaiah in September, we are actually not going to read these chapters in Isaiah because we covered the story right here in 2 Kings. The problem I have with that is that I'm an Isaiah girl. And I think that Isaiah recorded what he recorded for a reason, and the pieces that he didn't record for a reason. And so as we go through 2 Kings, we are going to look at Isaiah and then kind of figure out why Isaiah didn't include some parts, right?
And did.
Because Isaiah is our story of the end time. Isaiah chose pieces of history to create a giant picture of the end.
Right.
From the beginning. Okay?
Our theme.
So
46:10.
So we're going to cover three huge events in this lesson. The fall of the Northern Kingdom that fell to Assyria in 722 BC. And they, of course, were transported from the Northern Kingdom. If you look there on your slide, you can see that follow those red arrows. These were different exportations of the northern tribes, the 10 tribes, as they were taken into foreign lands. And then we're going to talk about the fall of the Southern Kingdom, which was approximately 100 years later. And the reason it didn't fall at the time of the Northern Kingdom is because of that story in the middle, where Jerusalem got delivered with King Hezekiah in 701 BC. So let's just jump right in, and we're kind of focus on it from the angle of Isaiah, but we're going to pick up the details that are in 2 Kings as well. The first thing I want you to take a look at here is if you notice that the tribes in the north were taken captive through Nineveh, over there into Media, and then further up north, just along those mountains there, you can see that the Northern Kingdom, when it fell to Assyria, they were deported to the north. When the Southern Kingdom falls in 587 BC, you can see that they're going to be deported east. They're going to go head over to Babylon. And the reason that I wanted to show you that is because if you do a fly-in of the constellation Pisces, the constellation Pisces represents Israel in biblical astronomy, and you can see that from the beginning you had the captivities of Israel foretold in the northern fish, which is your Ephraim fish and the house of Joseph fish, and then you have the other fish being headed towards the east, and this is going to be your house of Judah fish, okay? And together they represent the house of Israel. And you notice that tied around those fish is actually a separate constellation called the bands, and those bands are their captivity, and they are tied to the neck of a beast. a wild sea beast, like you see in Revelation, called Cetus. So this whole captivity of ancient Israel was foretold. The fish on the left, Ephraim, the fish on the right, Judah. When overlaid on the map, you can see clearly that picture. And now what's really cool too is that if you just nearby, they have Aquarius, and Aquarius is a guy holding water, and he's pouring out water, which represents blessing. Okay, he's pouring out water on another fish, and this one is Pisces Australis, or the southern Pisces, and this one is one fish. And what's really cool about Pisces Australis is that it is a huge fish. It's like double the size of the fish that were in Pisces. So it's a picture of the fish becoming one fish with blessings poured out on them in the end time.
Ezekiel's bringing it all together.
Yes, and like as in the sticks of Ezekiel in Ezekiel 37. And this is all taking place in a time in the heavens, what it's called the Age of Aquarius. So this is the representative of the millennial gathering of Israel with the fish in the sky. And I just thought that would be fun, and especially in light of the restoration of the gospel and the Moses appearing in the Kirtland Temple in D&C 110. After this vision closed, the heavens were opened again to us, and Moses appeared before us and committed unto us the keys of the gathering of Israel from the 4 parts of the earth, and the leading of the 10 tribes from the land of the north. So as we're kind of doing a history of their scattering, let's remember, too, that in this end time, there's going to be a reversal of what we're looking at here. There's going to be parallels, because some of us are going to get taken captivity into, again, because of our idolatry, the same way they did. But the end time is about a gathering in the reverse of the scattering that happened in ancient Israel. Article of Faith number 10, we believe in the literal gathering of Israel and in the restoration of the 10 tribes. That Zion, the New Jerusalem, will be built upon this, the American continent, and that Christ will reign personally upon the earth, and that the earth will be renewed and receive its paradisiacal glory again, this millennial age, as Israel is regathered back home. But for this lesson, we're going to look at the scattering of Israel anciently in the Book of Kings. If you look at this chart that's on your slide, you can see the kings of Judah in the green, and then you can see the kings of Israel in the north, in the red. And of course, you remember that after King Solomon, we have Rehoboam, his son, who is going to become king of Judah, and the tribes in the north are going to rebel under Jeroboam. And Jeroboam is going to try and institute his own new form of religious system, just adding in some pagan worship into what was ancient Israel's appointed times. And that should scare a few of us right now, just saying that, because that's exactly what we have done. We have taken the ancient celebrations of biblical things and mixed in a whole bunch of pagan tradition
Crossover
into it. And that is exactly what happened to the tribes in the north. There are many charts online that you can look at. This is one of my favorites. It's called Kings and Prophets Chronology. All you have to do is Google or use whatever search engine you want to search for the kings of Israel and Judah. And I like this particular chart because, as you can see, and we're not gonna get into it in detail, but I'm just showing you that I love the way they have, little devils by the bad kings and little angel halos by the good kings.
Makes it easy to
I know
decide.
this is kind of for kids. This is illustrated for me.
Simple enough for me, right?
I like it illustrated. That's what I did to Isaiah. I tried to illustrate everything, make it simple. But I also like that they have a lot of the archaeological discoveries here. And they have, you see those little yellow anchors? Those are actually anchor dates that we have. That we
connected all together.
Yeah, with the things that are being discovered these days. I mean, you think about it, in my lifetime, Noah's Ark, the Red Sea crossing, All of these things that are that's
They're starting to come
archaeological
forth.
evidence that's coming forth. I love what the Lord told Joseph Smith. He says the earth will testify
Right.
of the
And we're
Book of
seeing that
Mormon,
more and more
right?
and more.
All right, and so these, and then they have little anchor dates. So they're having a lot of little anchor dates, and we know which kings were during this period of time, so we can actually create quite a accurate timeline of this period of history. So you can go online and you can find out lots of really cool charts to help you keep this straight. And if you're actually reading through Second Kings, and I would recommend that you have a chart of the kings in front of you. You can find that in your Bible dictionary as well, under chronology, in your Bible dictionary in the back of your scripture. So often we'll use that with my students. All right, so the first thing that we want to realize is, how do nations die? This is some steps from the decline of the West. And I love that he points out that there's always 3 stages in the decline of a nation. The first one is that they will die spiritually first.
Well, it's so obvious.
So if you just look at, let's just say, for example, the removing of prayer from schools, okay? You're going to take out a spiritual thing, and then what will follow that? He says, next, the soul of a nation dies. Its national character deteriorates. So you have a deterioration of morals. You have a deterioration, of character values.
Traditional values in that
Right.
nation. We're seeing such a migration away from the principles of this, founding principles of this nation. And we're just headed clear out the door.
And this is amazing because he's not even talking religious here. He's talking about
Exactly.
how nations fall.
Exactly.
All right. And so the third step and the final step is when the body of the nation actually dies. This seems to be the pattern of the northern kingdom that Hosea is dealing with. We see first a decline spiritually, then a decline in character, and then finally, when the iniquity is full, then you have the judgment on the nation. And this is a quote from Thomas Jefferson. I tremble for my country when I recall that God is just, and that his justice won't sleep forever.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's so many signs in our day of these
Right.
things beginning to happen. The deterioration of the mindset of people has led us to these massive situations of shootings and things.
right, and the increase of crime, and you can graph these things, right? All right, so this is in 722 BC. Of course, the Assyrians came in, and the northern tribes fell in stages, but they basically timed the fall of the northern kingdom by the taking of Samaria, the capital. Okay, and so that happened in 722 BC. And I just wanted you to notice here that in some of the accounts it says, you can see right here on a stone relief that there are 2 courtiers, carrying a chariot to be presented to King Sargon II. So Sennacherib is going to come in and start the battle, but Sargon is going to finish it up. And here they're bringing, now wait, where do we get these chariots? Who built armies of chariots and horses?
Solomon?
Okay, so here we have exactly what Deuteronomy said. If you build up gold and silver, chariots and horses, you're going to see the gold and silver. Babylon's going to attack, Jerusalem in 587, and take all the gold and silver. But here we have the 2 courtiers carrying the chariot to be presented to King Sargon from Israel. Okay, and then
Yeah.
it says, a number of administrative documents excavated in Kauhu demonstrate that the Samaritan chariot corps was subsequently stationed in that city. And here we have already in the 9th century, the Israelites emerge from the Assyrian sources. These are Assyrian documents as master charioteers. They used heavily fortified tank-like chariots, which were drawn by a particularly large breed of horses originating from where?
Good.
Egypt. Remember that Solomon was told not to get horses from Egypt and for these weaponries for
You
building.
mean all this big armament? We're going to go off and abandon it in Afghanistan.
Yeah, something like that. The Samaritan chariot corps introduced these vehicles and horses to the Assyrian army, and over the following decades, their use and strategic importance increased markedly, so that by the 7th century, it was no longer associated exclusively with the chariot crews of Samaria. You have your Samaritan chariot crews fighting for the king of Assyria. All right, this map is just to show you not particularly the deportations that took place as they took the children of Israel and deported them. By the way, this was a standard Assyrian practice. When they conquered a nation, they would deport and import foreigners into, so that it would basically destroy your patriotism for your land. Dilute it, yeah.
Dilute the nationality.
Dilute it, right?
That kind of gives them, so they don't have a cohesiveness as a country.
Right, and you can see here that right here in this obelisk that you have the presentation of the house of Omri. Omri is your like your grandson of Jeroboam, so he's the house in the north that fell under the Assyrians. And then it says Jehu, a descendant of Omri, is submitting to Shalmaneser III. And so again, we're seeing, the other thing that's important to notice here is that the green part on this map is where this is the area that is conquered by Tiglath-Pileser the third. He is expanding the Assyrian Empire. So really what we see here happening with the fall of Israel is the expansion. And you can see it's expanding to the north and to the east and to the southwest into Israel.
And we're seeing this done without even conquering in our day. The dilution of our values is being done by
oh my goodness!
Unchecked.
We actually have a scripture on that right at
Unchecked
the end. We're going to get how my people are taken over without price.
Yeah, we're virtually just diluting ourselves. So our whole value system has been compromised.
Right. So eventually, again, these countries are falling to the Assyrian expansion in the Mediterranean. Now, it's really fun that there's these stained glass windows are actually called the three contemporary brothers of the book, because this time period that we're talking about, the fall of the northern kingdom and the fall of the southern kingdom, are the times when Jeremiah, the prophet, is going to be prophesying. He'll actually be in Jerusalem when Babylon conquers it. Right. Okay? And then we have Ezekiel and Daniel. Daniel's taken in the first wave of captives to Babylon, and then Ezekiel will follow him in the second wave. And these prophets were contemporary. They lived during this time of the fall of the kingdoms, and that's why when we study the writings of Jeremiah, he preached to Judah, and it was the fall to Babylon, and his writings are going to be prophesying about that. Whereas we see Ezekiel and Daniel both in Babylon.
And right prior there to Daniel and his captivity would be Lehi leaving.
Exactly, and that's your fourth prophet right there.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
There's Lehi. We should have had him in the four contemporary brothers of the book. There were actually others. There was Hosea worked with Isaiah, and you have Amos in the north, and there's a lot of prophets here on the stage at this time. But of course, between the fall of the northern kingdom, before the fall of the southern kingdom, Lehi is going to leave. And of course, they are seeking his life in Jerusalem, just like they sought Jeremiah's. And you know that they knew about Jeremiah, Lehi did, because in 1 Nephi chapter 7, it refers to Jeremiah being thrown in prison. That they're saying, just like, when Nephi's talking to his brothers, don't you remember what they did to Jeremiah? They threw him in prison. Jeremiah's going to get thrown in prison several times, so this probably wasn't his final imprisonment that they're referring to. But again, if we look in Zenos's allegory, this is the time when the olive tree is decaying, Remember, it actually opens the allegory in Jacob chapter 5 at a time when the tree is decaying. And this is this time period. And as the allegory opens up, we are introduced to three branches in the olive tree that are going to be scattered. They're going to be transplanted to other places of soil. And again, we're going to see that there is pruning and nourishing and digging. Their Heavenly Father is trying to save this tree, and he's doing it by pruning and nourishing and digging, which of course represents the prophets that are coming.
Jeremiah, and
yeah,
Ezekiel, and
these are the prophets trying to save the tree.
Yeah.
But of course, we learn in Zenos's allegory that the top of the tree dies, and we have three branches that get taken. So we have the one branch is going to be your tribes, your 10 tribes, taken north into Assyria. Another branch is going to be taken east captive into Babylon, just like we saw on the two fish in Pisces. And then, of course, that third branch is going to be Lehi departing to the New World. And so we have those three branches in Zenos's allegory. And then again, you can see that the pruning, the digging, and the dunging, the nourishing, is being done by the prophets. And so in the northern kingdom, we've been talking about Elijah and Elisha. And then also when we get to the books of the prophets, we're going to have Amos and Hosea and Jonah all declaring repentance. And notice, God, after today, when you learn a little bit about what it was like, what the Assyrian army was like, and what they did to the cities, if you think of those two she-bears and the 42 cities, and you understand why Jonah didn't want to go.
That great power comes at great cost. Most of the time, the cost that these prophets had to pay was real. It's prison time.
And with Jonah, it wasn't that he was scared. It was that he didn't like the Assyrians.
Why do I go risk myself for them?
Well, not only that, but when they repent, then Jonah gets really upset. He doesn't want them to repent. He wants them to get judged and wiped out. And you might have a little bit more compassion on Jonah when we talk about the fall of the northern kingdom to Assyria in this lesson. So, of course, your prophets that are preaching down south in Jerusalem and in Judah are going to be Isaiah and Micah and Nahum. And then towards right close to the captivity, you're going to have Lehi departing, you're going to have Jeremiah, and then we're going to have Daniel and Ezekiel, who have been taken captive into Babylon. Their books are going to be written from Babylon. So if you tally up the kings of the southern kingdom, you get out of about 21 kings, there's 8 of them in the scriptures that say that they did good. Okay? And of those 8, I'll get to that in just a minute. But in the northern kingdom, where we've mixed all this paganism and we've created a system of idolatry and mixed it in with our worship, it's easy to count the good kings there because it's 0. None. Okay? None of the kings in the northern kingdom are identified in scriptures as good.
That's a sad commentary.
And that is sad. That means it's really hard to keep the commandments when you've mixed among the Gentiles.
Idolatry, and all of the different
Which is
things.
why it's a dang good thing that the grace of God goes there with us. By the grace of God, go I. All right, and now in your southern kingdom, you're actually going to have 4 of the 8 that really are good kings, not just good for a minute. You're going to have...
Not part good.
Not part good. You're going to have... Well, we're all part good, but yeah. But they're mostly good.
Yeah.
You've got
Lean
Asa,
to the plus side.
You've got Asa, Jehoshaphat, Hezekiah, and Josiah. And these 4 kings are amazing because they try to get rid of idolatry. Yeah. They try to cleanse the land and to turn the people back to covenant, back to the Lord. So again, in our 3 branches in Zenos's allegory, that poor soil that the first branch gets planted in while being taken captive into Syria is poor soil. They get deported, but Lehi is going to be your good soil. That when he goes to the promised land, you notice he gets to go without being chained and shackled and taken into captivity that way. But that third branch in Zenos's allegory, it says it's the worst soil of all. And that's because when Babylon came in, they leveled the city. They destroyed the temple. And this one was probably one of the rough captivities there. Some people say that there's 4 branches in the
shared
allegory.
captivity is pretty bad too, really. Some of what they did.
Right. And in Esther, you're going to have them try and wipe out the Jews in Persia, right? We'll do that one in one of the next lessons. But here you have the 3 branches there, and I know that if you're real familiar with Zenos's allegory in Jacob 5, a lot of people say, well, there's 4 branches. Just be really careful to notice that when it talks about that last branch, it's referring back to the 3rd one, because it only really gives you a history of 3 branches throughout the allegory, right? All right. So the other thing that happens in the allegory, and this is really, really important because this is exactly what the Assyrians did, is they brought people in. There were people grafted in to the tree. They're brought in from foreign lands. And actually...
That's the Samaritans.
Yeah, that's the Samaritans. And, in some ways this is bad because it's bringing in, it's mixing everything up again. But in some ways it's good because some of them are going to bear good fruit. You're going to find.
Well, they get given an opportunity that they didn't have before.
Right. So in the time of Christ, in the allegory, you're going to find some good fruit finally on this tree again in the promised land, on the mother tree. So without going into Zenos's allegory too much, I just want to show you that the branches and these captivities, they're all told there as well.
Before you jump past there, don't forget all these illustrations and everything are in Rhonda's book about Zenos's allegory. And my son and the artwork, they did a great job if you're interested in that book.
Yeah, and you can download it on our website, or you can get the book. So they're both available there. So King Sargon is going to be the one who really depopulates the northern kingdom, and this is just there's so many artifacts. This is the only one I'm even going to show you guys, but this one is the Nimrod prism, and it infers a massive deportation of the Israelites following the defeat at the hands of King Sargon, and the repopulation of the area with people from lands conquered by earlier Assyrian campaigns, just like we said, that grafting in Zenos's allegory. And then it says on the stone, actually, I repopulated Samaria more than before. I remember they conquered it in stages. The 722 is just when Samaria fell. I brought into it people from countries conquered by my hand. I appointed my eunuch as governor over them, and I counted them as Assyrians. So there's just a historical record with that. Now, remember I told you that...
From the Assyrian point of view.
From the Assyrian point of view, right. All right, and remember I told you that we were going to take a look at this story now of what happens. The northern kingdom has fallen, but the Assyrians are approaching down into Judea as well. Because under King Hezekiah, he tries to do a reformation in the land. He's destroying the altars. He's tearing down the idols, trying to get Israel to return to Jehovah. And in doing that, he doesn't pay the Assyrians their tribute. So this is a little later, after the fall of the northern kingdoms. And the king of Assyria is going to march on Judea now. And sadly, we'll see some pictures. He's going to conquer Lachish, which is one of the strongholds in the south. And then he's going to advance from there. He's going to advance on Jerusalem. So in Isaiah, we're going to look at the story here because Isaiah is going to paint a picture of an end time situation very much like what happened to King Hezekiah. Okay, and in order to do that, you need to understand something. This is a chart from Isaiah Illustrated. Again, that book is available on our website, as well as all the free Isaiah classes there that you can just watch. There's 28 of them. But there is in Isaiah is in two halves. There are 7 themes in the first half that are repeated in the second half. And what I wanted to show you is the chapters that we're reading right now, which are going to be chapters 36 through 39. These are the ones that parallel the reading that we're doing in 2 Kings. Okay, those chapters all fall in the second theme. So the top theme is that gray theme, ruin and rebirth. The second theme is rebellion and compliance. It's that blue theme right there. In the first half of the book, that's represented by chapters 6, 7, and 8. Okay, and that same theme in the second half of the book is the story of King Hezekiah, what we're going to be talking about. Now, in Isaiah, when he's got 2 themes, one in the first half and one in the second half, they go together. So chapters 6, 7, and 8 actually go with chapters 36 through 40. Okay? And in the first half of it, you have the story of King Ahaz. King Ahaz is the father of King Manasseh, who is going to be the father of Hezekiah. So literally, the King Ahaz is going to be Hezekiah's grandfather. So we have King Ahaz's story in the first half and King Hezekiah's in the second half. But the way Isaiah puts them on the same plane, he's doing them as a contrast that's happening at the same time. Okay, in the end time, there's going to be 2 leaders. One is going to be like King Hezekiah, and one is going to be like King Ahaz. And he's going to represent them in those 2 sections of the book. And if you go into Isaiah Illustrated, you can see what section of the book you're in by that color theme. The comments where Avraham Gileadi is commenting on each verse, the background of that text box is going to be the color of the theme that you're in, so you know what theme you're in wherever you are in the book. Okay? So we're going to start with what Isaiah is doing with Ahaz, because he's contrasting that to what's going to be happening in our reading with King Hezekiah. You can see right here that it is in the reign of Ahaz from 735 to 715 BC that Israel falls in the north. Hezekiah's grandfather, this is when the kingdoms in the north actually fall. And Isaiah is going to use his attitude towards the Lord as a contrast to what Hezekiah is doing. These chapters 7 through 8, are juxtaposed with Hezekiah's scenario when the Assyrians are threatening Jerusalem in Isaiah's 7-part themed bifid structure, is what Avraham Gileadi calls this 7 themes in the first half paralleling the 7 themes in the second half. He calls that the bifid structure. Here we see how a king and a people react negatively in a similar situation. Whereas in our chapters that we're studying today, 36 through 38, we'll see how a king and his people react positively to the same situation. This is kind of following right along with what you said about the half hour of silence in our last lesson, that it's the same half hour, just 2 different outcomes, 2 different scenarios. And that's kind of the same thing that Isaiah is doing. Here we have a same critical situation, nation being attacked, 2 different scenarios, 2 different reactions. One that would be classified as far as covenant keeping goes as a negative reaction, and the other one a positive reaction. And we'll see the different results. And the threatening nation is Assyria. In both cases in Isaiah, meaning that in the end time, the threatening nation is represented by these Assyrians.
Type, yep.
Okay, so that's why I say you might feel a little bit like Jonah when you see what this type that Isaiah is
using. Do we like those guys?
Yeah. All right. This choice ultimately determines whether or not they will receive protection from the Lord under the Davidic covenant, because the king or the leader is faithful to God and the people are faithful to him. That means protection under the Davidic covenant that we learned. Whereas on the other hand, if the king is not faithful to the Lord, and the people usually kind of follow what the king's doing there, then they don't receive protection. And that's what you're going to see. This chart actually just shows you, if you look at the chapters, this is a chiasm, and this kind of a chiasm is a themed chiasm that goes over chapters. Okay, so you can see that Isaiah receives a prophetic commission in chapter 6. And then the parallel in the second unit, he receives a parallel, his commission on the seraph level in chapter 40. You have a historical preface. Isaiah's what happened to him in chapter 6, and then in the second half, this is jumping clear across the book of Isaiah to the second set of themes.
In essence, the second half of the bifid.
Yeah, he's creating a chiasm between the second themes. That's why when Abraham Gileadi discovered the themes in the first half and the second half, it started to unlock all the literary structures in the book of Isaiah.
Right.
I'm sorry, I get really super excited about it. All right, so
it's like Isaiah's good.
It's like I like Isaiah or something, right? Okay, so the king's rebellion, Ahaz's rebellion against God, is pictured in chapter 7, which we're going to look at in just a second. And then we're going to have Hezekiah's compliance pictured in chapters 37 and 38. And that is what we're reading in 2 Kings right now. And then in the center of this chiasm, what you have is what the people choose. Do they follow the rebellious king, or do they follow the compliant king? And we're about to find out. Okay? All right, so there's this principle that we just talked about where the people kind of do what the king does. And the reason that that's true in Isaiah, throughout Isaiah, is because, if the people don't like what the leader's doing, what are they going to do? They're going to vote in a different leader, right?
Or, yeah.
Or do or lynch him, or whatever they do.
Ignore him, whatever.
Okay. Whereas if the people, anyway, what I'm saying is in Isaiah, it kind of balances out because the people do have control over who's their leader to some degree. Okay. All right. So you have a principle of the one and the many in Isaiah where you have a king or even a father and his people, like Jacob is the father of Israel. So what his life does is kind of a type of what's going to happen to Israel prophetically. Well, in these two examples, what the people are, the king is representing his people. Okay. Now, how do you know I'm not blowing smoke? Isaiah would have to do it, right? What could Isaiah do in the text to show you that the people do what the king does? Okay. Well, that's your king exemplar chart. He actually uses same words. So like in Isaiah chapter 7, when he's talking to King Ahaz, and he's talking about an Emmanuel, this child that's going to be born from King Ahaz, and that is going to be an Emmanuel, and he's eating cream and honey, then you can see that later on in that same chapter, those who survive in the wilderness, the people, eat cream and honey to survive in the wilderness. So you can see the people are doing what the leader is doing, okay? Here we have the Assyrian invasion in the days of this Emmanuel, this child that will grow up in chapter 7. He's part of a prophecy that Isaiah will give to King Ahaz. And it says that the Assyrian invasion in the days of Emmanuel will come, and there'll be a time of trouble here. And you can see again that there's a time of trouble there. But one of the big ones that you can see is that when Ahaz finds out about the invading nation and everything, he is fearful. He surrenders to his fear. He actually does what Isaiah tells him not to do because he's fearful. And then again, you can see that the people, it says, the king's mind and the minds of his people were shaken as trees in a forest are shaken by a gale. So if you know what you're looking for, you can see all these word links between what the king is doing and what the people are doing. Again, with King Hezekiah, on the other hand, we can see that Hezekiah and his people, as a remnant, survive the national distress period. There's a remnant that survives there. And then you can see right there in Isaiah chapter 37, it says the king and the people eat what grows wild and survive. Okay, so the people are doing what the king does. Again, in chapter 38, we see that the Lord miraculously delivers Hezekiah from a mortal illness, and he's going to deliver Jerusalem from a mortal threat. So that what's happening to the king is happening to the people in the book of Isaiah. All right, so in chapter 7, you have Isaiah meeting with King Ahaz. He's going to meet with King Ahaz, and he's going to have his son, Shear-Jashub, meet with them as a witness. Because what he's going to make a prophecy and testify to King Ahaz, and so this is a really important meeting. These sons actually represent different categories of people. Isaiah has 2 sons, and then King Ahaz's son that's actually the woman there at this meeting is pregnant with Hezekiah. So Hezekiah is going to be the righteous son that we're going to be representing here, and then you have Shear-Jashub and Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz, but we'll get into that in another lesson. What we want to note here is that they're meeting at the Pool of Siloam. The Pool of Siloam is where Davidic kings are coronated. It brings them it's the spring of water. It's the spring of the covenant, and it reminds them of the covenant of David, that they will be faithful to God, that the city will be protected. And this all happens at the Pool of Siloam. Pool of Siloam is actually Hezekiah, because of the siege of Assyria, is going to build a tunnel, and the Gihon Springs is going to feed water into the city during the siege. That's why they're going to survive the Assyrian siege. But what you're going to have is he's going to send his guys out there to cover up the spring and hide the spring, with rocks and whatever, so that they're being fed water in the city, that they don't have to go outside of the walls and protection of the city to get water during the siege. So this whole Pool of Siloam, it's important in the New Testament as well. When Jesus does things at the Pool of Siloam, it's all imagery bringing into mind the Davidic covenant, that the king has to be faithful to God, and then the people will be protected if they're loyal to him. This is a picture that we just flew in here of the Pool of Siloam. They've actually discovered the pool to the level it was at the time of Christ. They haven't found it all the way back to Hezekiah, but they've actually, this would have been the pool where Jesus did the miracle of the lame man that he healed there.
Right.
The Pool of Siloam. All right, so this is King Ahaz's reaction. Hezekiah is telling him, do not call a conspiracy all these people, like people call a conspiracy, or be afraid or awed of the things that they fear. So we've got Israel and Syria in the north trying to do a coup against King Ahab in the south. They're trying to get him to get in a treaty with them so to protect them against Assyria. And Isaiah is telling King Ahaz, don't do this. Don't make treaties with other nations. Just be faithful to God, and he will protect you. You don't need to worry about these 2 kings that are plotting up there. Do not call, think about this to us, because Isaiah is putting this on the table for us in the last days. Do not call us conspiracy, all that these people call a conspiracy, or be afraid or awed by the thing that they fear, but sanctify the Lord, making him your fear and your awe. And to you he will be a sanctuary, but to the 2 houses of Israel a stumbling block and a snare, the ones in the north that are plotting. And so what we are looking at here is you seeing the awe and the fear and the words. He's using these same words kind of interchangeably back and forth. He's doing something that's called word linking, and he's chaining them together. And so what he's telling them is that some of the people are going to fear and awe a conspiracy. They're going to be afraid of man, and they're going to focus on that, while some of the people are going to fear and awe the Lord, and that they are going to fall into a snare, the ones that are focused on man and the goodness of the world, saving the earth in the last days. Mm-hmm. Okay? They're focused on man. But those that are faithful to the Lord, he will become a sanctuary to them. There's so much prophecy going on here.
Well, it's encouraging when you think about that.
Yeah.
The Lord's going to be our sanctuary.
Right. And Isaiah is so big on not trusting in man and trusting in God. And this is really kind of fun. There's actually a cryptic thing where they take the alphabet in Hebrew and they write it forward, and then they turn the corner and then they write the second half of the alphabet backwards underneath the first half. And then they trade the letters out. So like it's kind of like when you have alphabet letters and you represent them by numbers, and then you try and figure out what it says, like a cryptogram. Okay, they do this with the Hebrew language by writing the alphabet certain ways and then decoding it. And when you come across the Bible actually does this in 3 different places. It does it twice in Jeremiah and once here in Isaiah, where it says this name that nobody knows, like Tabiel. And then you have to use this secret code to find out that it's actually Ramallah. That if you transpose the name, it's Ramallah. And what Isaiah is telling them, that this conspiracy that Israel and Syria have, that they are going, Rezin and Pekah are together in an alliance to try and take you out and put in their own king in over Judah. And in this code, it's telling them which one they're trying to put in as king. It says the son of Tabiel, but Tabiel is Remaliah. So the son of Remaliah is actually Pekah. That's their coup. That's their secret combination to try and take out King Ahaz. But of course, you remember that Isaiah is saying, don't pay any attention to these secret combination coups that they're doing. Just trust me. Focus on me. I got you. I will be your sanctuary. He says, then Isaiah says, look, Ahaz, just trust me. I'll give you any sign. What do you sign? You ask a sign of the Lord, and I'll prove to you that what I'm saying is true. And then Ahaz, this is so
fascinating.
This is so wimpy. Okay, he says, I will not put the Lord to the test. Okay, now God is offering you proof that what he's saying is going to come to pass. And he said, no, I don't want to ask for a sign. So, really what Ahaz is doing is just, don't tell me don't prove to me what God says, because then I have to obey. And at this time, Ahaz is already planning a different route besides trusting in the Lord. He's actually, and we don't learn this in Isaiah, but we learn it in 2 Kings, that he's actually going to make a deal with the king of Assyria.
Yeah, he's trying
to hedge his bets.
Yeah.
So and so Isaiah gets
totally trusted in the flesh.
Isaiah really gets frustrated at King Ahaz's double-facedness here, and he says, "Take heed, O house of David." Notice he's calling him to a Davidic covenant here, because King Ahaz is representing them as is their king, and he says, "Take heed, O house of David. Is it not enough for you to try the patience of men? Must you also try the patience of God with your
great."
With your games here? Okay, so again, we're going to take a look. He's functioning as an example of rebellion. Again, he's proving unfaithful when put to the test. His people are going to descend the ladder because he's being a bad leader here. So here it is in 2 Kings, and this is the part that Isaiah doesn't quote. Okay, this part is not in these chapters of the same exact story in Isaiah. So Ahaz sent messengers to Tilgath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, I am thy servant and thy son. Oh my gosh, a Davidic king is pledging
obedience,
a covenant to the king of Assyria. Come up and say, remember now, wait, this is a parallel to our day. Isaiah is showing us what's going to happen. I am thy servant and thy son. Come up and save me out of the hand of the king of Syria. Because remember, it's Israel and Syria at this time that are cooing against Ahaz. Assyria hasn't attacked yet. Out of the hand of the king of Israel, and which rise up against me. And so Ahaz took silver and gold that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house, and sent it for a present to the king. He took the temple treasures.
Tried to buy it off.
Tried to buy off the king of Assyria. After Isaiah had said, tell me whatever sign you want.
See the types and shadows of our day with the deals we try to buy off with money.
Decides to bypass what God has said and to make his own alliance and his own treaty. Okay? So the question is, why doesn't Isaiah include this part about taking the silver and the gold out of the temple to buy off the king of Assyria? Why doesn't he put that in there in his story?
Obviously, it doesn't apply to the end time.
Exactly. Exactly. The president of America, whatever, is not going to take the gold in Fort Knox and send it over to Assyria and try and buy them up. No, it's going to come down differently. And so that part of it isn't in Isaiah.
Isn't a type and a shadow.
Okay. But we can get the details in 2 Kings, because this detail is not a type for what the unfaithful servant in the end time does. I mean, there is an unfaithful servant in the end time, but this part wouldn't be a correct type, so he's not going to use it. Okay, Isaiah's not. Here's another thing we learn in 2 Kings that's not in Isaiah. It says, he, King Ahaz, followed the ways of the kings of Israel and even sacrificed his son. I'm talking human sacrifice. He sacrificed his son in the fire, engaging in, don't forget that Solomon built the temple to Chemosh right there on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem.
Yes.
He sacrificed his son in the fire, engaging in the detestable practices of the nations that the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the high places on the hilltops and under every spreading tree. So at this time, this is what the Assyrians did. The Assyrians made offerings to all the gods. Hey, maybe one of them's got a god that pays attention, so we'll just give offerings to everybody. And that's kind of what King Ahaz is doing.
Right.
Does this sound kind of New World Order-ish? We'll just placate everybody? Okay?
Except for the Christians.
Except for Jehovah. He's not too pleased with this, especially killing the children. So why didn't Isaiah tell this part about King Ahaz?
Obviously, the same reason.
Obviously, he doesn't. He doesn't offer one of his sons on the altar. So this wouldn't be a type of the last days. That's why 2 Kings tells some details that Isaiah doesn't. Okay. Now we know that historically, this is actually a question that I just typed in on the internet. Why are 2 Kings 19 and Isaiah 37 the same? Okay. Whereas in the other chapters, there's different little details told, okay? And for the most part, they think, well, there's more details in 2 Kings. Maybe that's why we're supposed to teach this story in 2 Kings rather than Isaiah, because there's more details in 2 Kings, right? Okay, so here it says, someone answering that question online. Isaiah chapter 37 was written by Isaiah long before the Book of Kings was written. Okay, we know that because historically he lived long before the stuff that happened in 2 Kings is recorded. Okay, then in this other answer it says the writer of 2 Kings consulted the best and most accurate accounting of this particular event in his effort to record the events for historical purposes. So since Isaiah was an eyewitness to the event, he in 2 Kings incorporated what Isaiah had said, and then probably added a few details from records of what happened with the king of Assyria and stuff, okay? All right, those are two guys that I agree with. Well, here's the guy I don't agree with, okay? This guy says that the reason that there's the same stuff in here is because the account in Isaiah 36 through 39 is a rewrite of 2 Kings. And you're going, wait a minute, Isaiah was before that. And he said, no, because there's another writer that wrote the other half of Isaiah, because there was this guy named Cyrus that was written in the second half of the book of Isaiah, and Cyrus came after Isaiah. So obviously somebody wrote after Isaiah, and then do you see how
no prophetic gift?
Exactly. And so the whole stand that people make today, and people say this everywhere, they say that there was a writer to the first half of Isaiah, and there was another writer that came along and wrote the second half. Now, besides the fact that it destroys all the literary structuring that Isaiah did between the two halves, I can save every viewer here a whole lot of time and effort. You don't even need to go into the arguments because it's answered in the New Testament. Here we have John in chapter 12. John says that though Jesus had done so many miracles before them, they believed not on him still. That the saying of Esaias, which is Greek for Isaiah, the saying of Isaiah would be fulfilled, that he spake, who hath believed our report, and to whom hath the Lord been revealed? That's a quote from Isaiah 53 verse 1. Okay? And then John says, therefore they could not believe because that Isaiah said again, he hath blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts. So that's from Isaiah chapter 6. So here we have John quoting from the second half of Isaiah and the first half of Isaiah and saying that Isaiah wrote them both.
End of debate, right?
Well, sort of. What if John got it wrong?
Oh, well, then we're...
Well, if John got it wrong, we got bigger problems. But here's Jesus. Jesus was by far the strongest evidence that proves that Isaiah wrote the book, is that Jesus quotes from Isaiah 29 and Mark 7 and says, Isaiah was right when he prophesied to you about the hypocrites. Okay, then in Matthew 12, Jesus says, referring to Isaiah 42, this was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. And then here in Matthew chapter 8, referring to Isaiah 53, Jesus says, this was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and carried our diseases. Why does anyone debate over whether or not Isaiah wrote both halves of the books?
Because they don't believe in prophetic word, I guess.
Because they don't believe that a prophet that lived hundreds of years before Cyrus could know that Cyrus was going to live.
Right, that's what I said. They don't believe
exactly. Yeah, I was giving the exact example of exactly what you said.
Right.
Okay. But I believe that that is not true. I believe that Isaiah saw the end from the beginning, and he's telling us how it's going to go down in many, many ways. Okay, so back to the waters of Shiloah here. He says to him, seal up the law among my disciples. And then he's telling him, bind up the testimonies, be true and faithful. And then in Isaiah chapter 8, it says, I will wait for the Lord who hides his face from the house of Jacob and expect him. And that is our hope. That is our hope. No matter what, Jacob in Isaiah is those who believe in God but don't necessarily believe in keeping his commandments or what he says. They're believers in a creator God, but nothing that's going to tell me what to do, right? So that's your category of Jacob Israel.
I believe there's a God, but I don't believe in God.
Yeah, like that.
Don't believe the words of God.
Right. And so I love this, that in the end time, it is the people of God are always waiting for him, even when he hides his face from Jacob. Again, we see that this personalized individual eye, just like with Elisha. The miracles at this time period were personalized, individual. We see the individual here. It's not a nation yet. It's just, as a matter of fact, the whole nation is being like Ahaz.
Right.
They're selling out. But wait, there's these eyes, these people, these individuals that say, I will wait for the Lord.
An inner core. Yeah.
They wait for him through the time of trouble. They wait for him and they wait almost even beyond the point of endurance. But he comes through for them in the end. All right, so now let's jump over to the other half. Let's jump over to the story of the faithful Davidic king. This is the one that in Isaiah, in the first half, that Isaiah told him that the woman that was with child there at the well, at the pool of Siloam with them, that she was going to have a son and call his name Emmanuel. Now, we all know that that's a prophecy of Christ, right? Because he's the great Davidic king. And all Davidic prophecies are prophecies of Christ. But it was also a prophecy of Hezekiah. That's the one that was going to be born. And the prophecy in his name, what does Emmanuel mean?
God is with us.
God is with us. Now, with Jesus Christ, I mean, that's literal. But with King Hezekiah, that means that there was a Davidic covenant that got fulfilled, because the watch cry words for a Davidic covenant in effect is God is with us. You see it with the 2,000 stripling warriors. You see it all over the scriptures. That's what they say. God is with us. Okay? That's a Davidic covenant in effect. The people will be protected. All right, so in Isaiah 38, we learn that Hezekiah was sick. As a matter of fact, he's so sick that he turns his face to the wall, meaning that he has no other options. It's at the wall. And he prayed to the Lord, and he said, "Remember, O Lord, that I have walked before thee in truth with a peaceful heart. I have done that which was good in thy sight. I've destroyed the altars of idolatry. I've tried to bring the people." And Hezekiah wept sore. And then came the word of the Lord to Isaiah, saying, "Go and say to Hezekiah, Thus saith the Lord, the God of David thy father." Notice the David. Whenever you see God referring to David, he's talking about a faithful king and a faithful people, or in the case of Ahaz, an unfaithful king and an unfaithful people, but he's bringing them to mind of the Davidic covenant that they're under. Okay? Remember that you can't get cursed unless you've made a covenant. And if you've made that covenant, God can rescue you.
You also can't get blessed unless you
Exactly. That's the point. Then you just fall, pray to whatever the nations are doing. You're not under any covenant at all. Yeah. Thus saith the Lord, the God of David thy father, I have heard thy prayer, and I have seen thy tears, and I will add to thy days 15 years. And I will deliver thee and this city out of the hand of the king of Assyria, and I will defend this city. So this is when Hezekiah passes his first test. And this shall be a sign unto thee from the Lord. I will bring back the shadow 10 degrees on the sundial. And you know how that happens. We have some speculation of maybe how that could have happened when Joshua, the sun stood still. But here in Hezekiah, at this time in 701 BC, I have absolutely no speculation. Well, absolutely don't know how. That's about 20 minutes. It adds about 20 minutes. There's some very interesting things about the length of a year that we could get into, but we don't have time. So my life is cut off like woven fabric. This is when Hezekiah is, you need to realize that when he was sick, he didn't just have the chicken pox. I mean, he was dying. And even being alive was a struggle for him. My life is cut off like a woven fabric. He's severing me from the loom. Can I contain myself until morning, when like a lion he racks my whole frame, like with pain? Surely as night has followed day, thou art bringing on my end. So this is King Hezekiah ill. This is Isaiah being sent to him. But we actually learned something really interesting from the ascension of Isaiah. That whole my life is cut off like woven fabric, is severed from the loom. Look at this. It says, and it came to pass in the 26th year of the reign of King Hezekiah of Judah, that he called Manasseh his son, and Manasseh was his only son. So he didn't have children. He felt like he was being cut off from the womb. He had Manasseh, but it was his only one. And Hezekiah called him Manasseh into the presence of Isaiah, because when Hezekiah was sick, he had a near-death experience. So watch what it says, what happened to him. And he called, this kind of sounds like an Alma 36 experience. He experiences the pains of hell, and then he sees his Redeemer. So listen, it says, and Hezekiah called Manasseh into the presence. He's trying to bear testimony to Manasseh, just like Alma did to his son Helaman in Alma 36. And he said, in the presence of Yeshua, again, a witness, and the son of Isaiah, in order to deliver unto him the words of righteousness, which the king himself had seen, of the eternal judgments and the torments of Gehenna, of hell, and the prince of this world, and of his angels, and of his authorities, and of his powers. Alma saw that too. And his soul was racked with the pains of hell. And then in verse 4 it says, and the words of the faith of the beloved, which he himself had seen in the 15th year of his reign during his illness. So King Hezekiah has an Abrahamic test, like we talked about with, and Heavenly Father tailors these tests to every individual. And for King Hezekiah, it was that his posterity was no matter that he had tried to be a righteous king, everything was being cut off. We learn later on in the martyrdom of Isaiah, in the book The Ascension of Isaiah, that at this time Isaiah actually tells him that his son Manasseh is going to turn against God, and it's going to have Isaiah killed. And
That would be hard.
oh my gosh, you talk about a test. And Hezekiah again is just weeping inconsolably, and he decides in his heart, it says, that he's going to kill Manasseh and not let him kill Isaiah. And Isaiah sees it and he says, don't do it. God has ordained me for this end. And even if you try, you won't succeed. Don't do it. Oh my gosh, so much more behind the story. But here Hezekiah passes a personalized test, similar in severity to tests passed by other deliverers. And by passing the test, Hezekiah becomes a deliverer on the son-servant level of the ladder. And he can deliver the people now if they will be faithful to him. So, of course, the Assyrian army has now surrounded. They've demolished Lachish, which we'll talk about in just a second, which is right just a little south and west of Jerusalem. An Assyrian army of 185,000 men now are laying siege on the outskirts of Jerusalem. And Hezekiah is going to keep God's law, and the people are going to keep the king's law. Hezekiah is going to appeal to God to deliver his people from destruction, and the angel of God is going to slay the besieging Assyrian horde with a plague that night and deliver Jerusalem. Notice this is a battle that is fought by God. They never pick up a bow or an arrow. Matter of fact, Isaiah prophesies to King Hezekiah, not a bow or an arrow will fly, and the king of Assyria will back off. Here again, we have another situation where Isaiah is talking about Zion, and he's using this threefold thing that he always does every time he talks about Zion. You have a servant being righteous, and you have the overthrow of the evil. Every time Isaiah talks about Zion. In the book of Isaiah, over 40 times. Anyway, that you can learn more about that in Isaiah Illustrated as well. But here we have the response of the king and the people, that the people reject the king of Assyria's proposal. If you read these chapters, you remember that you've got Rabshakeh. He's standing outside of the city walls, and they actually studied that chapter in psychology classes for examples of the perfect strategy to wreck somebody when you go into battle. They use it as a study. And then, but of course, the men on the wall, the people, are faithful to Hezekiah. And instead of defecting like they're being told to do, they go to Hezekiah and they say, pray harder. And you got to love this because Isaiah spreads out the letter that Rabshakeh has written to him, and it's just awful, saying, the gods of Israel didn't protect any of the other cities. You really think that God's going to protect you? And Hezekiah, he spreads it out and he says, God, read this. Read what they're saying. And it's just classy. He says, don't let them do this to your name. And so you notice it's not about Hezekiah. It's not God save me. It's God save your name. Protect these people. It's not about him. So Isaiah compares the people's response to the Assyrian siege now as a woman, the woman Zion, rejecting the proposals of her unwanted suitor, the king of Assyria, and laughing the Assyrian king to scorn, knowing that God, her husband, will protect her. Will we do that? Will we do that?
I think there are those who will.
I hope so. To Hezekiah, the Assyrian sees as a source of tremendous anguish. He is responsible for the safety of his people. Hezekiah compares the situation to a child that was about to be born, but the mother lacks strength to give the birth. And so he sends Eliakim, his servant, and Shebna, his scribe, in sackcloth and ashes to Isaiah. And Isaiah says, don't worry. I'm trying to do what you say to me when you do your John Wayne quote.
Don't worry, girly. I'll fix their wagon.
There you go. Isaiah says, God's got this. Be faithful. So here in 2 Chronicles, we have something about Hezekiah that we don't have in the Isaiah story. And this is what it says. In those days, Hezekiah was sick unto death, and he prayed unto the Lord, and he spake unto him, and he gave him a sign. We read that part, but now watch this part. But Hezekiah rendered not again according to the benefit done unto him, and his heart was lifted up. Therefore, it was because of this that the wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem. So we don't have this picture in Isaiah that Hezekiah got proud again. Why? Does Isaiah not keep a very good journal? What?
It's because it's not going to be pertinent.
Because in the end time, this servant that is going to cause Jerusalem to be saved is going to be faithful. Okay? And so that part won't apply to the faithful servant in the end time. Now, I could have put out a lot of pictures here, but I'm afraid that there might be kids and families, and so I'm going to suffice it to say this. The reason Isaiah is using Assyria as this type for this end time attack is going to be because they were terrorists.
It's not going to be pretty.
Ruled the world by torture. Their kingdoms didn't rebel against them because they knew if they did, they would die horrific deaths. And this is just one little part of one of the reliefs that was in the Assyrian palace. And they were the most feared and hated people of the ancient world. When they captured Lachish, they have engravings of impaling people, putting eyes out, flaying people alive, hot oils, enslavement, and decapitating every part of the body you can imagine. That's what they did to terrify people into not revolting against them. And so Hezekiah has good reason to be afraid. But he puts his fear and awe, remember back from chapter 7, because Hezekiah put his fear and awe in man. Ahaz put his fear and awe in man and his treaty that he would make with Assyria instead of God. Whereas Hezekiah is going to put his fear and awe in God. Okay? So Assyria's siege of Jerusalem in Isaiah's day is a historical precedent. Hezekiah receives the letter from the messengers and he reads it. And then Hezekiah goes to the house of Jehovah and unrolls it before Jehovah. And Hezekiah prays and says, O Jehovah our God, deliver us out of his hand, that all kingdoms on earth may know that you alone are God. Jehovah. And there you can see Rabshakeh. He's the one making all those threats outside of the wall when the people are going to stay faithful to Hezekiah. And Hezekiah is proving faithful to the Lord here. That's the test. And here's the deliverance. Because the people prove loyal to the king and the king proves loyal to God, Jehovah answers Hezekiah through the prophet, I will protect this city and save it for my own sake and for the sake of
my servant David.
My servant David, right there. And the angel of Jehovah went out and slew 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. And when men arose in the morning, there lay all their dead bodies. Just as King Hezekiah performs the spiritual role of a proxy savior to his people, so does God's servant in the end time, sequel to these events. As Hezekiah suffers a mortal illness to pay the price of his people's deliverance, so does God's servant when he is marred beyond human likeness in the end time. Isaiah 52. Having passed God's test of loyalty, King Hezekiah and his people ascend to the next highest spiritual level, having proven loyal to Israel's God under a threat of death. The king individually and the people collectively are reborn. And that's the birth of Zion in the end time. All right, so the Assyrian invasion of the Promised Land, again, we kind of talked about, this is Isaiah giving descriptions of how strong, powerful, and terror-like they are here. But what we need to understand as we come to the end of this lesson, the parallel in the end time. In the end, however, Assyria's armies are defeated in two major battles. This one is from Isaiah 30, verses 31 and 32. Notice about the mortals. Pay attention to the mortals in these two battles that we're going to talk about, okay? Did mortals win the battle in Hezekiah's time?
No.
No, God fought the battle, right?
Right.
Okay. This one in Isaiah 30 is about Ephraim, America, when we take the battle to the gate, and we do fight this battle. Notice the difference between this one and the one that's going to parallel Hezekiah in Isaiah 31. In verse 31 and 32 of chapter 30, at the voice of Jehovah, the Assyrians will be terror-stricken. Did that happen anciently?
No.
No, it didn't. This is all future, okay, in Isaiah 30. At the voice of Jehovah, the Assyrians will be terror-stricken. Something's going to scare them. Well, I guess maybe the plague scared them. 185,000 dead in the morning. Excuse me.
The remaining.
Right. They who use to strike with the rod at every sweep of the staff of authority, when Jehovah lowers it upon them, they will be fought in mortal combat. So this is a total end time prophecy where there is a mortal combat and the Assyrians go down with the help of God by the staff of authority and the rod, like Moses holding the rod out over the sea. Okay? And this one is the prophecy about Jerusalem, where it says, and Assyria shall fall by a sword not of man, a sword not of mortals shall devour them. So at Armageddon, God will fight the battle for Jerusalem, just like he did with Hezekiah.
Right.
Which tells you all kinds of things about a Davidic covenant and certain factors being in place at that battle. Okay? Before the sword, they will waste away and their young men melt. Their captain will expire in terror and their officers shrink from the ensign, says Jehovah, whose fire is in Zion and whose furnace is in Jerusalem. Isaiah 31. Right? So that's your end time application there. Now we just got a few slides of the Babylonian captivity when Judah falls in the south. It's the same situation here. We have three sons of Josiah, righteous Josiah, who is killed in a battle with Egypt as Egypt comes to power, and he goes out and is slain in Megiddo. But he has three sons, and they're going to come to power with some jumping back and forth because they're all in tribute at this time, and certain of the kings rebel against the king of Assyria, Babylon, and then Babylon's going to come, just consider it like three warnings. Like in Second Kings chapter 24, Jehoiachin has stopped paying tribute, and Babylon comes in and spanks him. He takes Daniel captive in this first siege, okay? And then in 2 Kings 24:11, we're going to have Jehoiakim, who's different. He's the next guy. He only is king for 3 months, and because the king of Babylon is unhappy with him, he comes in. Remember, they're all under tribute at this time, so if they don't do things right, king of Babylon spanks. Okay, so he comes in, and under Jehoiakim, he takes all of the leaders, the king, his whole family, the women, the household, and Ezekiel gets taken in that captivity there. Okay, he's age 30 when he's taken captive. So they're going to be taken captive for 70 years. Is Ezekiel going to get back?
Not likely.
No. So I think we forget that. We forget that Daniel and Ezekiel
died in
Babylon.
Right.
Okay. And then in 2 Kings 25, we're going to have Babylon coming in when Zedekiah stops paying the tribute and rebels against him. He's going to come in and he's going to level Jerusalem that time. That's called the desolation of Jerusalem in the scriptures. And at that time, Jeremiah is in prison. And Jeremiah has been prophesying the whole time to Jerusalem that if you don't repent, the king of Babylon is going to be a hand of God in coming to judge you. Wait a minute. In the end time scriptures in Isaiah, the wrath of the king of Assyria is going to be God's hand of judgment on his people Egypt. There's a lot of parallels going on here.
Right.
All right. So the king of Babylon is actually going to release Jeremiah, put in another king. They're going to assassinate that king, and then because of the assassination, the king's family is going to take Jeremiah with him and the daughters into Egypt, and that's how that's going to end. We'll talk more about that when we talk about study Jeremiah, but right now we're going to look at a prophecy, two prophecies of Jeremiah before we finish. The first one is that Jeremiah prophesied to King Zedekiah, you need to trust in the Lord, because if you put your faith in your treaties with Egypt or whatever you're going to do, it'll be a reed that will pierce your hand. It will fail. And he says, and thou shalt come to Babylon, and there thou shalt die. Now, remember that Zedekiah is executing any prophets that are prophesying that Jerusalem is going to fall. I mean, just think about if you're in America in the last days and you got people saying, oh no, we're being invaded, we're being subjugated or whatever. And, the cry would be, you're undermining the morale of the people when they need to be strong.
Right.
Right? So they feel like Jeremiah is treasonous because he's prophesying that Jerusalem's going to fall. Okay, and so they're going to do horrible things to Jeremiah. We'll talk about that later. But he tells King Zedekiah that he will come to Babylon and there he will die. Now, Ezekiel, before he was taken captive, had a prophecy to King Zedekiah, and he said that he would be brought to Babylon, but that he would not see it. Now, King Zedekiah is going to mock them and say, look, you prophets, you can't even agree. One of you says that I'm going to die in Babylon, and the other one says I won't even see it. And you probably know what happens.
Yeah, they put his eyes out, obviously.
Yeah, in 2 Kings 25, when Nebuchadnezzar comes in and levels Babylon in 587, they slew the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him with fetters and brass, and carried him into Babylon. So he was taken to Babylon, he died in Babylon, but he never saw it. And every word of the prophets is fulfilled. To the harlot Babylon, who represents an idolatrous, materialistic world empire in the book of Isaiah. Well, this is Babylon. I don't know if you think that our society today is materialistic at all or idolatrous at all, but that would be the representation of this mistress of Babylon in the end time. And that wouldn't be just America. That would be many countries in the last days. It says that harlot is riding on the waters, on all peoples. I was provoked by my people, and I let my inheritance be defiled, says the Lord in Isaiah 47. I gave them into your hand, and you showed them no mercy. Even the aged you weighed down heavily with your yoke. This is them being taken into captivity. Now, in Isaiah 52, it says, at first, my people went down to Egypt. So there was that first slavery in Egypt that they came out of in the Exodus. And then it says, then the Assyrians subjected them for nothing. Okay, so that was the fall of the northern kingdoms and everything. And then he says, what do we have here? Says Jehovah, my people are taken over without price. Those who govern them act presumptuously, says Jehovah, and my name is constantly abused all the day long. So that will be the condition in the end time. As an end-time event involving those who claim to be God's people in that day, the new Babylonian captivity resembles the old, except that this time it isn't limited to the ancient Near East, but encompasses the entire world. Although it comes as a covenant curse on the heels of apostasy of God's people, just as it always did in the past, this coercive New World Order impacts not only them, but nations and peoples everywhere. So you remember when they're taken into captivity, they have to pay tribute, right? So here you have some of the Assyrian, I'm trying to remember what those panels are called, but anyway, you can see that all the nations are bringing tribute. And here we can see in China at a festival, they're paying tribute to the emperor. So I guess what I'm saying is, what does paying tribute look like? Does it look like this? Okay, is that paying tribute in captivity? Or maybe will it look like this? A worldwide tribute. This is being taken captive.
Maybe a carbon tax.
And maybe it will be, like Isaiah said, that my people are taken over without price. In other words, maybe there's not a battle there for that purpose. One other prophecy to remember as we close here is of the prophet Jeremiah. And he made a prophecy about when they're taken captive into Babylon. He said,
70 years.
Yes, you know, and this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Okay, we could talk more about verse 12. It kind of divides up into the two different captivities that he's taking into Babylon there, and the several different returns. There's going to be 3 returns when they come back with Ezra and Nehemiah. I think you're going to hit those next time. But it was actually in Babylon, Daniel, 70 years later, is reading that prophecy
Right.
of Jeremiah when he receives the prophecies in Daniel 9, which pinpoint the birth of Christ, which pinpoint prophecy in the latter days. And it's one of the most amazing scriptures that we have. And with that, let's go ahead and call it for this time. And we'll get into Ezra and Nehemiah and the fulfillment of those prophecies in the next class.
Okay. We're just grateful to have been able to give this to you. You know, the scriptures are so full of types and shadows. We are headed into the most exciting time the world has ever known. And some people would argue, well, what are you talking about? Many of the prophets wanted to live in our day. And many of them will return and be in our day. But the point I guess I'm bringing is the excitement is the millennial era is about to be born. God bless.
Amen. And
thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And come back again. Boy, we're getting into
It's fun stuff.
Ezra, Nehemiah, Daniel prophecies. The good stuff is just beginning to roll.
Okay.
Till next time.
Till next time.